I bow to you and invite you to bring Buddha nature to the forefront of your consciousness. We live in this amazing time where we have access to so many tools on the path. We have access to so many different paths up to the pinnacle of super awesome high mind states, all the way beyond into enlightenment. You have all of these options. Oh, so many options. And it's wonderful. It's a very exciting time to be alive and practicing. But there is always a trap. There's always something to be aware of. And I call it shiny new toy syndrome, where we start to explore a technique, a method, a tool on our path. And when it's brand new and shiny, we love it and we give 100% to figuring out how this tool works, how this technique functions and brings us into exquisite mind states. And we have a lot of fun with it at the beginning. Like, oh, this is awesome. But there's a point that we reach where the newness wears off, where it's not as exciting anymore, where we hit the boredom, we hit the grind, which happens with every technique, with every method. This is learning to work with that sense of boredom, that sense of just grinding through our practice is an essential teaching that we face on the path. But because we have so many options available, what can happen is we have this shiny new toy syndrome. So we take a practice and we work it and we explore it and we play with it and we have fun. And then when we hit that wall where the real work of the path is about to begin, but we have to cross this little ocean of boredom. We get to the edge and we start to wade into the waters and we're like, oh, no, this technique's not working anymore. I'm just gonna put it on the shelf and I'm gonna go find a new shiny toy. And then I'm gonna try this one. And I'm gonna play with this one. And so then we work with that technique and we play with it and it's new and it's shiny and it brings us to the edge. So now we're back at the same spot, but we arrived through a different route and we hit the boredom, the grind, and then we say, oh, this one must not be working anymore. Let me go find another one. So we go find another technique and we work with it and we play with it and we get really excited about our practice again. We're reinvigorated. And we can spend lifetimes doing this, where we just play with techniques up to the point where we actually have to start to work hard, where we have to actually confront our own boredom, our own grind, or the drudgery of discipline, because we can just put it on the shelf and go start over with something else. But if you do this enough times and you're doing your core practice, I tell people Trikaya Buddhism can be summed up in 4 words. Pay attention, keep going. That is the whole of the teaching. Pay attention, keep going. So if you are paying attention as you are exploring these different tools, you'll start to figure out your mind is playing a game with you, that it likes the shiny new toy. So it will keep wanting to reach for the new technique, the new method, and it will use all sorts of arguments of, oh, well, this technique's just not working for me anymore. This method isn't working. I outgrew it. I need something stronger, or I need something less complicated, or whatever it is that you're doing, and you reach that crossing, your mind will convince you that I'm done with this technique. Give me something, give me a new shiny toy to play with, because it keeps us in that comfort zone. It keeps us returning back into that brand new learning phase of like, okay, I've got to figure out how to approach this technique. I got to figure out how to implement it. I've got to, lay out my new set of tools and play with it. But eventually, if you're paying attention, you start that place of boredom, that place of drudgery becomes familiar, and it starts to kick in like, oh, wait, I've been here before. And it might take you 3 times, it might take you 3,000 times. And you hit that point and you start to recognize that, oh, sensing a pattern here. Because this is what we watch for in our mind. We watch for these patterns. And we recognize that, oh, I'm feeling restless. I'm wanting a shiny new toy. So maybe instead of putting this technique that I've been working with on the shelf, maybe I'm going to work with it a little longer. Just let me give myself another week, another month, another 6 months, and just see what happens if I just keep using the same technique, and how does it help me cross through this boredom, this place of drudgery. And if you keep returning to the basis of that technique, whatever it is, it becomes your life raft as you cross through this boredom. Because even the awareness of boredom is awareness. And we start to recognize that, oh, I'm still here, or there is still presence here, even in this place where I want to run away. So we keep at it. We keep going with it. And eventually the practice shifts. We have an internal change that happens, where that revulsion to boredom, that part of us that wants to run away from the drudgery, recognizes that, oh, this is part of life too. This is existence as well. This is the path too. And we begin to work with those types of mind states. And something really cool happens at that point. Is that's when our sitting practice, the practice that we do, our formal meditation, really starts to get reflected in our ordinary day-to-day life, where we're practicing mindfulness or being aware. Because in every life we face the boredom, the drudgery, when we're stuck waiting somewhere. And we start to pull through that teaching, that wisdom that erupts from the meditation cushion into our day-to-day life, where suddenly a point where we remember feeling a lot of impatience and a lot of just wanting to get through whatever it is. We want the next thing to happen, just happen already. But if we spent the time on the cushion facing that and just sitting with that, then in our walking about life, we are able to draw on that same skill. We're able to start to work with that sense of boredom in our ordinary life when we're interacting with others. I read an excellent definition by Trungpa Rinpoche for patience. It's maintaining non-aggression. So when we're practicing patience with ourselves, with others, we're maintaining non-aggression. So a great deal of facing and working with this internal boredom that is part of the path is recognizing how aggressive we get, how we just want it to change. Like I'm sitting here and usually there's like all this beautiful light that pours through, there's this bliss that I touch into, or there's at least energy moving, like there's something happening. Or I'm fighting all my thoughts wherever we're at on the path. But when we hit this stage of boredom, it's like nothing's happening. It's just nothing. We're just watching, the same old thoughts roll through, or not even that. Sometimes it's just this sameness. And at that point, we often get a little aggressive with ourselves. We're like, come on, make it work. Just hurry up. But if we practice this patience, this maintain our non-aggression, then we can check in ourselves. We can check ourselves and be like, oh, wait, there's aggression there. Let me sit with that. Let me create space for that aggression and maintain myself, my mind, my presence in a state of non-aggression as we move through this. And if we start to do that, we're less inclined to go reach for the shiny new toy at the first sign of opposition, the first sign of boredom. Because that can happen too. Like if a practice is difficult, now this is where it gets tricky, because sometimes we do try to do a technique that is above our current pay grade. Maybe we're just learning how to sit, and somebody gives us a technique where you need to focus on 5 different things at once. Some techniques are very complicated, but if you're just learning how to sit, maybe start with one thing and become familiar with that. Or maybe you were taught how to just focus on one point, but your mind is too chaotic. It's just moving and floating all over the place. So in that case, maybe focusing on the breath and noticing the coming and going, the movement becomes the focal point. So this is where self-honesty on the path really comes in. We have to be very aware of, am I just bored? Like, did I actually hit this point where the technique's getting more challenging and I don't want to pull up the effort to make it work and work through it? Or am I just, is it really beyond my reach right now? So have that conversation with yourself when approaching a new technique and look at it and say, okay, well, can I modify it to fit where I'm at now, first of all, because that way you're not chasing after some shiny new toy. You're still working within the same technique parameters, and give that a try of a week or two of daily practice and see. And again, checking in with yourself, paying attention, saying, am I just getting bored? Am I becoming restless? Or is this technique just simply not working for me? Is it, uh, am I just completely stuck? And this is really where having a teacher is very helpful, because then you can talk to them and be like, hey, I've been working with this technique and this is what's happening. And then they can direct you to a technique that might be more appropriate, or they might turn around and say, no, keep going, keep doing it. And of course, with any teacher, you want to check in with your own inner guru, your own inner teacher, and do that little fact check of like, okay, is that right? Is that true for me? So don't be afraid of boredom. Don't be afraid of restlessness. Don't feel like you need to go and extinguish it by finding some other technique. Now, as I said, we do grow on the path, we do change. So there is a sense of progression, but our progression is a spiral. So we often come back around to a technique that we might have used before, and we're able to go into it deeper. But in general terms, beginner practice, it's helpful to have that single point of focus and to train the mind to allow yourself to be orientated or relating to that single point of focus. As we hit intermediate practice, so we're able to kind of focus in on something, like if we need to concentrate, we can concentrate. But when we reach a certain level of that ability, the mind starts to play games. Like I remember my teacher having us chant. So every day for 45 minutes to an hour, we were chanting Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum. And so I do this for an hour. And then after a month or so, I had this moment where I realized I'm chanting. My mouth is moving, the sound is reverberating through my mind. And then this whole other conversation is happening in my head. I'm like planning out my day and I'm thinking about my issues that I have to have at work, that, this problem that I'm tackling. And I caught myself. I'm like, hey, how is this even possible to have my mind split in two that way? So that was very interesting. I kept with the practice, like just noticing this new game that my mind was playing. But that was also a signal that, oh, okay, the mind needs something more to hold on to. Because of course, you go back, return to the mantra, but then it's still this other thing. So it's like, oh, okay, let's add in a focal point besides the mantra. So we can focus in on a chakra, or we can focus on a color, or we can focus on a Buddha, in addition to the mantra. So then we're starting to grab the other senses and unify them into a focal point. So that can be helpful in the intermediate stages where we start to activate and kind of take all of the six senses and pull them together into a single point of focus. And we can do that, through the visual, through the sound, through the touch, through everything coming together. But if you were brand new to meditation and somebody's like, okay, do the mantra, focus on the Buddha, listen to um, this music in the background, and feel your body. I feel like, wait, that's too much. So at times it's appropriate to switch technique. Other times it's just the shiny new toy syndrome. And which is which. Because as we keep going through the intermediate phases, as I said, the path's a spiral. We reach a point where doing these super complicated techniques where we're visualizing an entire yantra mandala with all the different Buddhas and all the different figures, that it's unnecessary. So now we're back on the spiral where it's like, you know what? All I need to do is focus on this little rock that's on my altar, this little one dot. And there's all of existence is in that rock. And we just have that one little crystal, and that's our technique. Becomes that single point of focus that we can then use to hold our attention until everything disappears. Where we and the crystal both merge and completely dissolve. So there's this interesting progression that happens on the path where we go from super simple to super complex and back to super simple. But knowing your own mind and where you are at in that cycle is very important, because we have this issue of the shiny new toy. So pay attention when you feel this need to switch techniques, when you're like ready to try something new. Ask yourself, am I doing this because it's really appropriate for this next level of practice? Or am I doing it because I'm at this edge of boredom again, this edge of restlessness? And have I been here before? And maybe is this the time? Is this the one that's going to actually carry me through that? And if that is it, then keep going. Just keep paying attention, keep noticing the arising boredom, notice the aggression that comes out of it, which is very, can be very surprising, because we think that, well, I'm just bored. And then this part of your being that's like, well, I don't want to be bored. Like, I want to make something happen. And then if we can recognize that, oh, that's actually very aggressive. We want things to be different than how they are. And then, oh, okay, I don't have to keep manipulating. I don't have to keep trying to change everything. I can just be with everything as it is and begin to become aware of the underlying essence, the actual presence of being with life as it is, instead of my projection of how I think life is. And we move through that boredom, and we just keep going. Are there any questions or comments? Experiences?
You answered my question. I was going to ask, how do you tell the difference between, when a technique actually doesn't work versus you're at that boredom stage, but you pretty much answered it already.
Yeah, it gets I mean, it's tricky because like I said, the mind is very, very tricky. It wants to play with us. So it's that's really where that self-honesty comes in, where you have to really strip through and have that heart to heart with yourself and be like, okay, is it really the technique? Or are we at the shore of this boredom again? And and for me, like I said, it's that if we're paying attention, we'll recognize that, oh, I've been here before. I was using a completely different technique, but I've been here before. So,
Another thing that's come up for me is I'll be sitting and I'll wait, like I'll be meditating up to a point, and then it feels like, okay, it's time to get up off the mat. And I recognize that like I'm hitting like a little bit of boredom on the mat, even though I'm like filled with light and it feels really good. It's kind of like, okay, well, now, like as you described, nothing's happening. It's not, nothing new is happening. I guess like I'm saturated. Maybe I thought that's what's happening. But I think I'm gonna try to push through that now and see what's on the other side.
yeah. So I think that's why it's really helpful to decide ahead of time on an amount of time that you're going to sit. So if you say, all right, today I'm going to sit for the hour, and no matter what happens for the hour, I'm going to sit. That can help because it's tempting to be like, all right, I'm just going to sit until I'm done. And sometimes we do that, like especially if we go out to power places, because there's an exchange that's happening at a place of power. And there does come a point where the place of power is like, okay, you're done, get out. And sometimes that is like much more forceful than others. But in our own meditation place that we have set up, that we have, in our home, in our own little sanctuary, or if we're going on a retreat to, in ancient times, we would do the retreat to the cave where we'd be like, okay, I'm going to wall myself in for, 30 days. And we would just be there for that block of time, no matter what. So that can help. Are there any more comments or questions? Okay, well, let's do some more meditation. Oh, yes, please.